Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 79 of 2-Minute Talk Tips. This week's tip comes to us from special guest, Dr. Denise Vaughan. Know that you can do it.
Know that you can already do it. I think if there was one thing that I would tell people as you do this all day long, you can absolutely do this in front of a crowd. It's okay. And if there's a thing that bugs you, like I tell students to make eye contact, I tell them to move, and I tell them to move intentionally. You get to a new topic, move on that, because the human eye is attracted to movement. So that's when we're going to start paying attention again. And I try very hard to do this in my teaching. If this is a point that they should know for their test, I try to move right every time I talk about it. And I try to repeat that topic at least 3 times so they remember the concept before they leave. If it's a process, I emphasize the steps and I move for each of the steps. All of those are cool things. If the eye contact thing freaks you out, that's cool. There are other ways to do that. If you don't really move your arms a lot when you talk, that's cool. There are other ways to do that. So identify the thing that you think you're not doing because you're uncomfortable, and we'll find a way around it. There's lots and lots of ways.
Stick around, and after the break, we'll learn more from Denise Vaughan. Welcome back. I first remember meeting Dr. Denise Vaughan in a picnic shelter overlooking Canyon Ferry Lake outside of Helena, Montana. We were both undergraduates at Carroll College at the time and members of the Talking Saints speech and debate team. I was a freshman and Denise was, I think, a year or 2 ahead of me. My time on that team was one of the most formative experiences in my life. It taught me to think, to interpret literature, to speak in competition more effectively, to argue more logically, to manage conflict better, and to put in the hard work to do it right. I've talked in various episodes about my path post-college. Members of our team took a wide variety of directions after they graduated. Denise went on to earn her BA in International Relations from Carroll and her MA and PhD from Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. Today, she teaches courses in debate, oral communication, and debate and policy analysis. Denise is a firm believer in the ability of rhetoric to shape the world and empower students. Through the use of a variety of outside sources and the interests of students themselves, she seeks to create connections between the world they study in the classroom and their interactions outside the classroom. She sees the classroom itself as a collaborative experience where students and faculty interact with material and educate one another. Her courses focus on experimental learning and problem solving. Denise is also the director of forensics at University of Washington Bothell and coaches the award-winning nationally ranked speech and debate team. We recently met up for the first time since college to catch up and to talk about the intersection of speech and debate and public speaking. I recorded this episode at one of my favorite public recording sites, the Wayward Coffee House in Seattle's Roosevelt neighborhood. So now, let's meet Denise.
Denise, thank you so much for joining me today. It is awesome to catch up after, 25 years or so.
Oh, don't age us.
It's just amazing because, as I said in the introduction, we competed on the same team back in college and met back in the wilds of Western Montana and the gorgeous countryside that is. So, of course, getting started and meeting first in collegiate speech and debate, we both already had some background in speaking, but was that how you got into speaking and doing speech and debate, or was public speaking always something that you had a passion for?
It's interesting that you asked that question because I don't think I really did have a passion for speech and debate. It wasn't until I did it in my junior year of high school. Till I did it started my junior year of high school. My sister had done debate for a really short amount of time, and I wanted to do the same thing, try and do something that would bolster my applications to college. And it turned out to work nicely for me because I got a scholarship to go to Carroll, which is terrific. But I've never actually liked the stage or the spotlight, which I think is kind of funny.
Really?
Yeah, I don't like it. I'd prefer to sort of be a part of a crowd or to speak one-on-one. I don't like the faces staring at me, but I absolutely love learning, and
I'll turn my face a little bit away then.
and I love to share that with other people. Mm-hmm. So that part's comfortable for me, and I certainly love to win an argument. So debate was my happy place.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think that's one of the interesting things too. A lot of folks in the forensics world are all into the stage and the debate and the speech and things like that. But what a lot of folks outside this world don't know is that collegiate debate and even high school debate, it's not an exercise in public speaking as much as it's an exercise in public thought.
Right. And I really believe in the power of rhetoric and argumentation. I'm horrified to listen to bad public speakers and bad arguers, which is, politics is replete with people like that. But I love a good argument in that it's a good discussion. And it's an opportunity for us to break down an idea. I remember when we were in college, for instance, we got topics about which I absolutely did not agree, and we had to advocate for them. And you had to find a way to advocate for it in a way that you could actually believe. And I remember one particular one, we talked about gun control. We talked about liberation theology. I never would have studied that. No, I never would have studied liberation theology unless I had had that opportunity to really dig deep into the argument and try and understand not two sides, but many sides. And I think that's what we're missing a lot in contemporary discussion.
Right. It's interesting because it really forces you not only to explore the gray areas, mm-hmm. It forces you to explore the tactical approaches to making a point. But the other thing that I think becomes really interesting when you look at it in terms of communication theory is the idea that, and of course this is really a book I've talked about in the past that I strongly recommend for anybody who is in marketing or sales, is the Robert Cialdini book, Influence. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he talks about in there is the need for internal consistency. So once we say something, whether we believe it or not at first, we tend to start to believe it more and more. And the more we repeat it, the more we believe it. And when you have to start arguing both sides of a position repeatedly, that really does interesting things to that process in your head and how you think about issues.
Yes, and also that plays into identity politics. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. It's going to come to me in a moment. But there's a fantastic book by the guy who wrote The Contract with America. I'm going to remember his name. Nope, I lost it. Okay. It'll come to me. I'll tell you later.
I can certainly pull that up and post it. Add it to the notes over at 2minutetalktips.com/Denise.
So it's fabulous. But what it tells us is that it's much more about identity politics as well. So when we identify with a group, once we have identified with that group, then we tend to believe that the characteristics of that group are us, right? And so, like you said, if we make a claim, and then we can continue to make that claim, then we are more likely to believe the claim. Same if someone that we identify with as our identity group makes a claim, we continue to agree with them. And a lot of them are modest claims, like, for instance, I like tea, right? And if I keep telling you that I like tea and you should try the tea, eventually, if you identify with me, you'll try the tea and you'll be much more likely to like it, even if you'd prefer coffee, right? And that doesn't mean that you don't drink coffee or any of that, but that identity group can then continue to shape our politics. And there are certain words that work. It's called words that work. There's certain words
that work
that identify for Frank Luntz that we identify more with. And his work is much more along the lines of my work, where in political psychology. So he actually identifies words that identify to certain political groups more likely, so that are more persuasive, and that based on the words that you are more comfortable with, that can actually identify you with a political party, which is pretty cool.
Interesting. And then, of course, vocabulary also gets tied into socioeconomic group
Absolutely.
That we grow up with in education, so that all then has its own other. And is then the idea of a dog whistle just a more extreme version of that?
for sure. And the dog whistle might just be one characteristic, but including, for instance, if you listen to someone who is a public speaker, you are expecting to identify with, particularly a political one, and then they use those code words, which is often referred to, for instance, in the book Thank You for Arguing by Heinrichs, as tribal speak, those code words that you are already prone to like, and that then are used by someone that you think that you identify with, then identify you with your tribe, make you more consistently agree with it, and therefore malleable to whatever their argument is.
Absolutely. Very cool. Very interesting. And, we see this sometimes in a lot of things we coach speakers to do, even without necessarily having that theoretical background, which I would encourage everybody to go ahead and explore. When we tell you to, before you go ahead and talk to a customer, talk to a new group, get to know them, understand who they are, what are their issues, what are their concerns, what are their buzzwords, and figure out how you can use that in your point, hopefully for good.
Right.
It's one of those things when I was doing training at Office Depot and training their folks to sell products, one of the guidance I got from their corporate after they went through our previous slide deck was we had to take out every instance of the word easy and never use the word easy, because Staples, their main competitor, had built their brand on that was easy and the easy button, and so that became a bad word in the Office Depot context.
Fascinating. Yeah.
It's how we build all those cultures, and whether you're talking about political group or a sports team or a fraternity or a company, we all build our own custom language to go along with that. And words have power, and you have to understand what's going on around that vocabulary. The other thing that I think, again, from your theoretical background, it sounds like it sort of aligns with that a little bit. One of the things that I think we've seen this rise of extreme politics on both the right and the left in the U.S. and all sorts of other ideologies. And I attribute that in large part to the internet, not necessarily because what it does is in the same way that it helps connect marginalized people with one another. It tells you you're not alone.
Right.
And if you have, positive views and positive attitudes and just need to connect, that's awesome. But if you have fringe and destructive attitudes that may have been shunned by society in the past, now you're getting told you're not alone, because there are hundreds of people around the country that you can connect with.
Many of whom are fake people. Yeah. But I've always wondered why search engines haven't gotten smart. I mean, why do they keep advertising travel trousers to me? Just bought a pair of travel trousers. Now is the time I actually do not need another pair. You would think you'd advertise, hiking boots or a lovely blouse to go with the trousers. But I keep getting the ads for the trousers, and it's the same thing, right? We keep getting hit in the head with, if we searched one thing, then we just continue to get hit in the head with it instead of something complementary.
Exactly. And then you build on top of that autocomplete, and it just becomes a really self-fulfilling type of thing. So as we're, obviously this language stuff is really fascinating, and, we could go hours and hours into this.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, you do. You do this professionally. You went to years and years of school for this after college. But a lot of folks can't get to that point because they're just so worried about how do they deal with just even getting up in front of folks. And you're working with college students and in speech and debate, and I imagine many of them are getting up in front and speaking for the first time, or in the communications classes they have to take. How do you help somebody who's feeling just very nervous and petrified about going up there and doing that?
Yeah, most of them can talk, actually. They talk all the time. God knows they talk when I'm talking in class, right? So that's actually my approach, is you're doing this every single day. You talk all the time. You can absolutely talk in front of a group of people. There is very little difference between talking to one person and talking to 300. I have to say, with a caveat there's a big difference if it's 6 people and they might talk back, or if it's 30 people and they are interacting and taking notes. But once you get to a large enough group, it's pretty much like talking to one person. You're not making eye contact with them very much. You're not spending too much on any one person. You're going to talk to the general group in the language the general group understands. So it's actually pretty easy. The middle ground, that can be hard. Right. But my favorite thing is I make them do impromptu. And we start on day one in our public speaking class and in our debate class with getting up and doing public speaking, which is awesome. It usually works really well. They give 3-minute impromptu speeches, and nobody is ever judged who sits back down. It's just not a problem. And the group is so supportive. In all of these years of teaching, nobody has ever been mean. Nobody has never said any, like, oh my gosh, you did a bad job. Nothing like that. The only things people have said is, I totally understand, or I feel what you're going through. And I teach college students, and they can be snarky, but they're really not. I mean, everybody understands this is a fear, number one fear in America. I honestly think it should be spiders. Spiders are something rational to be afraid of, or snakes that swim.
Then you can deal with fire.
Yeah, or you have to move. But public speaking, it doesn't kill you as a general rule.
Right. And I think that one of the things that's really interesting too is, it's a very socially acceptable fear to have too. And, I've talked about this before, but the whole Jerry Seinfeld bit referring to the misinterpreted study from the UK in the 60s that ranked public speaking as the fourth biggest, or death is number 4 and public speaking is number 1. You'd rather be the guy in the coffin than the guy giving the eulogy. Which is a very flawed interpretation of that study, which, just ask college kids. My understanding is ask college kids to just pick, of these things on this list, what are you afraid of?
Right.
And, immortal college kids are not going to choose death.
Yeah. Well, and actually most of us don't think about it. Mm-hmm. There's hardly any reason to be afraid of that.
Right. It's
pain. There's good reason to fear pain. Loss, those kinds of things, but fearing death is absurd. It's inevitable. It's like taxes. So you might as well have a good time and conquer your other fears, including public speaking.
Go out and get it done. and yeah, so through this, you're getting to work with all these kids today and coach and bring your team to number 5 in the nation, Woohoo! Which is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Awesome things coming out of the Pacific Northwest here. How did you come to this path of being a professional speech and debate coach?
Reluctantly. I was kind of done with debate at the end of college. Not because I didn't love it, but because I'm a political scientist. And I know you were shocked by that, weren't you?
I know. I know. My degree was also the double poli-sci comm.
Yeah. So I was international relations and comm, and then I wanted to go study political science, and I did for 2 years, and then I studied political psychology at Wazoo, which is absolutely. It's very much about communication and politics.
And Wazoo, by the way, is Washington State University.
Yeah, Washington State University. Is there more than one option for that?
It's a local references.
Sorry.
Local references get you local work.
Yeah, excellent point. And I had some amazing instructors at Washington State who really broadened my understanding of what politics could be about. And I'm much happier with political psychology than I was with the traditional political science. So I appreciated the branching out, understanding how people make decisions in a more complex way than thinking that people are more influenced by their institutions. I'm much more interested in how the individual mind works and cognition and how that shapes politics.
So that's interesting, because that was going to be my next question then. What is political psychology? Because that's something a lot of us haven't heard of if we're not into the wonkier space.
The wonkier space. It's not a wonky space. It's very structural space. We steal from psychology.
Once there's structure in the space, that makes it wonky.
We take concepts from psychology and apply them to the political world. In my own work, I do image theory, which is an image is essentially a complex stereotype that I look at how a decision maker views another country.
So by image, you're not referring to necessarily a graphic
not like what they look like.
Okay.
No, but I analyze the way somebody, like let's say Ronald Reagan, views the Soviet Union. And then I would code every single thing that he says in speeches. And this is obviously old work. But we look at everything they say about that other country in terms of their economic prowess, in terms of their military prowess, including their decision-making style, whether or not they are an enemy, if they're manipulative, if they have a large group of decision makers, and also their culture. They think their culture is complex or simple. And then based on that assessment, I can put them into different categories. Say, for instance, that Great Britain is an ally, right? So we think that they're economically and militarily strong, but we think that they have good intentions towards us. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, and then the difference between enemies was very vague. My research focuses on the difference between enemies. So we see some enemies as very static and powerful enemies, and some enemies as not, as possibly ill-intentioned but incapable. And there's just different strengths as enemies, and so my work is the graduated enemy image, allowing for different variations in the way in which we, as decision makers, not me, but actual decision makers.
Not yet, anyway.
Not today. Maybe next week. View other countries, and how those statements about those perceptions then line up with public policy later on, the policies that they push.
Interesting. So it's a way of then, translating those views, how they see that, to what they do down the road and what they encourage.
Right. And this is huge, because the way that decision makers talk about other countries absolutely is a precursor to the policies. So for instance, if we think that Russia is an ally versus Russia is an enemy, how is that going to influence our policy in terms of natural gas and oil, where Gazprom is one of the world's largest suppliers of oil and gas?
Right.
And that's super important, right?
Right. And it's interesting because now when you talk about that, you start seeing, my understanding is that the big challenges in Europe right now are the discussions about the natural gas pipelines from Russia through the Ukraine.
Absolutely.
And the tensions there.
And the war.
And the war. The war that's
that whole
there.
small war thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and to access to ports, etc. And then the question is, as we speak about them, are we perceiving them as an enemy or an ally or something else, something more benign? What are we? How are we categorizing them? I don't know.
It occurs to me, it sounds like you're talking about brand, because in some way, because we talk about a brand that a company has, and we talk about personal brands that people have. A lot of people say, no, I don't have a brand. I don't want to be a brand. You do have your brand. Your brand, whether you're a company or an individual, is how other people perceive you. It is a shortcut to the rest of their perceptions about you, and you want to influence that in a positive way or a way that you want, but you ultimately don't get to choose your own brand.
Right.
And it sounds like, it makes me think of, how are these countries, what is the brand of this country in terms of political science? And that's probably a little sloppy, but it's interesting how these different parallels tend to happen between different worlds.
I think it's fascinating too, because I think that brand connection is very much how individual politicians see them, right? Mm-hmm. So I could track how the United States has been talking about Russia for a very long time, and then say that has changed recently. So that's much more about the influence of an individual's perception rather than group perceptions. And that's also really interesting in terms of forming public policy.
Wow, fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
And then how does that then help when you're coaching your debaters?
I think the way my understanding of the world helps the most is in the topics, because most of our topics are about politics and economics, and I generally have a pretty good understanding of those concepts, especially compared to the other coaches.
And a lot of the other coaches are coming from more of a classical rhetoric background.
Right, or especially the younger coaches, right? And they might have more of a rhetoric experience, and it gives me a little bit of a leg up. My students, like many students, generally have a deep understanding, because we require that in the Law, Economics, and Public Policy program at UW, University of Washington, Bothell. It's pretty deep in all of those areas. So it's hard for you to sort of get out of the program without a good understanding of economics, without a good understanding of the basics of law, without a good understanding of social policy and how it's implemented. So a lot of the topics that the students get, they're pretty darn well prepared for.
Mm-hmm. And, a lot of the students who are going into that field anyway, and that hobby, it only consumed like 80 hours of my life in college, 80 hours a week.
A week.
Yeah. already have a passion for those areas
Right.
and already interested in those
Right.
areas.
So then we're teaching a lot of how to then persuade people, right? So they may have the background knowledge, and then they come to a debate team and they get the background knowledge that they each have weird and wonderful specific knowledge. I have one student who's an avid sailor, and so he's always talking about aerodynamics and the engineering and functioning of boats, which is really cool and weird and wonderful to add to the conversation. And so then they have this wonderful, rich conversation going. And then we add to that, I can add to that a history of policy. And then we talk about the topics and we get the structure of an argument, the structure of the debate, and all of a sudden, poof, that blossoms into a really amazing and multifaceted conversation.
So does your team also do more of the drama-oriented categories of events?
So we don't really do interpret. We do platform speeches. We do the interviewing and the other impromptu speeches very well. They're pretty good at that. But one of the things that I would lament about speech and debate right now is that we only offer speech, any of the speech events, 3 times a year at regionals and then at nationals. And our first regionals is a week after school starts for us. So for the semester schools, they've been back in the game for more than a month. But a lot of my students have just met me.
Right.
And they can't get a platform speech memorized, let alone learn to interpret something.
Exactly. Unless they started working on it months before
Right.
over the summer, and they have to know about it
Right.
and figure out all that stuff, and then develop all those bad habits before they get coached out of them.
Right. And it's important to develop the bad habits and then adjust to fix those bad habits. That's a part of our learning process.
So what do you like most about doing this coaching and about working with these students?
Students are awesome and exhausting and challenging in ways that I would never challenge myself, but in a good way. They make me think about teaching constantly, and I think teaching is one of the most important callings. They make me think about my preconceptions all the time, and I'm always challenging them. You're coming in with a preconception, and walking away saying, "Oh, I had one of those too." I'm going to have to think about where my ideas are coming from. But watching students develop over the course of, especially when I get them for 4 years or even just a couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
and watching them develop and become the people that they are becoming is pretty awesome.
Right. It's awesome. I met, are most of your students then traditional age college students, or is it a mix?
It's a mix. I've had students older than me. I've had students who are running START, not at UW Bothell, University of Washington Bothell, but at other schools. And I've had students who went on to get masters at the same program, and I have students who are now in medical school, and just these wonderful combination of things.
Awesome. It's an incredible diversity you can encounter in there. Folks who have
Yes.
that passion for that public policy, that law, for any number of reasons.
Right.
You can get a very diverse group of folks in that,
yeah.
either just transitioning into adulthood or who already have those adult experiences and now they're figuring out, what do I do next?
Yeah, and they're making sense of all these really complex things that they already know, right? And that they are explaining in new ways. And my team is super diverse. I have students who are studying law, students who are studying computer science, engineering students. It's like, how did you get to debate? This is awesome. Super cool.
Exactly. So why should, what do you tell students who are thinking about pursuing it or maybe haven't thought about forensics, or parents who are trying to figure out, what should I encourage my students to do?
One of my favorite lines is, "It looks great on a resume." It really does. The other thing I have to say that I prey upon is a lot of people are afraid of public speaking. And if you are the specialist in your field who's not, you will be the one who's called on, which is amazing. And you may get the opportunity to speak to really powerful people. One of my friends is a computer science guy. He develops games, and he does not hire people who with computer science degrees. He's interested in people with language degrees and people who did debate and a bunch of other things.
Mm-hmm.
But he says a lot of the things about coding you can teach.
Right.
It's not that. That's not the hard part. It's the people.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding what the people want and Speech and debate is an incredibly fast way to learn that. And the other thing is, and I think that this is really important to me as a parent, is that you need to fail. And debate gives you no time to dwell on that, speech and debate. So if you go to a typical tournament, as you know, but I'll just tell your listeners, you get up in the morning and you go to this tournament. What it looks like now is we do impromptu debate. So we get a topic, and we're in a room together so the students are not like completely abandoned. We get a topic, and 20 minutes later, they are in a round debating that topic. They probably have an idea about the topic, but it's not something they're necessarily an expert on. And then, in most cases, the judges tell you how they voted.
Wow.
And about half the time, it's not going to be good for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you come back to the room, say a couple of venting things, and get a new topic. And you've got to recover. And you've got to shake it off and get back in the room and do it again. And that might be debate. It might be giving your speech. If you do a speech or an interpretive event, you have to do that 3 times, usually over the course of the same day, usually 3 in a row. And they don't give you feedback on the speech events, which is good. And that's good to get those written later. But you know what you did wrong.
Right.
I mean, I remember one time in college, I went in and did an interpret piece from a play, and I skipped like 2 minutes, right dead center. And then you've got to go do it. You have to just shake it off. And how often does this happen to us in the rest of our lives, where we're having a conversation with a superior and we just said something stupid? And you have to just continue on. You can't just allow yourself to be crushed. And debate does a great job of that.
Absolutely. And when you make a mistake in a speech in the real world, no one is ever going to notice.
Right.
You know,
right. And truth, that happens in those. Look, when I forgot that 2 minutes, I placed in that round. I forgot 2 minutes of the speech. I didn't make stuff up. I did absolutely. I'm sure I did something out of order because I don't even remember fully what I did. But even if you make that mistake, nobody's sitting there with a script waiting for you to make that tiny mistake.
Right. And when you're presenting in a business context, it's the same way. People are not going to notice if you make a small mistake or you leave out a point.
Of course.
They're just not. But when you talk about what's happening in impromptu debate, that's a really interesting thing. And that actually is a lot more analogous to what happens in just a lot of corporate environments.
Absolutely.
You're going to go to a meeting, you're going to get asked a question. Maybe you'll be invited to the meeting at the last minute, have a few minutes to prepare, and then the boss is going to make a decision right there sometimes.
Yep.
And you got to do your job the rest of the day, so it's great preparation for that.
And it also means the same thing that how we ought to always be treating our jobs is that we need to be keeping up on what's going on. And if you don't keep up on what's happening in the news and how basic theory works all year long, you're up a creek when it comes to a debate. That's a great kick in the pants for your business world, right? I mean, if you aren't keeping up with what is going on in the rest of your business, then you're not participating at the full level that you could be.
Absolutely. And that means everything from the broader world trends, which are going to impact your organization, the trends within your sub-industry, the technology, the jargon, the business trends there, but also beyond your role. You need to understand, if you're in marketing, you still need to understand some about finance and accounting and operations and manufacturing. And all those other divisions also need to know something about marketing and sales and PR and all this, because it's all going to impact that. And the higher you rise in an organization, the more interdisciplinary stuff you're going to have to work with.
Absolutely.
I think one of the biggest lessons I got out of my time in speech and debate, it was really half a lesson. I actually learned the other half the hard way, but was the importance of depersonalizing conflict, being able to take an argument and argue with somebody and not challenge them as a person, as an individual, and to recognize when people are criticizing what I'm saying, it's not about me.
Right.
Unfortunately, and I got very good at that. The problem is that when you get into the real world, other people don't necessarily think that way, so you have to recognize that other people, when you criticize their arguments, may take it personally.
Right.
So you have to adjust that framework. But having that mindset, I found to be really helpful.
Well, an argument is not a fight.
Exactly.
They're very different things.
For somebody who is, maybe in the middle of their career, maybe just getting started, and we talked about dealing with nerves, that it's just talking about other folks, but what should they know about how they present their material? Where should they start?
You should start with what's important. Now, of course, there's very different structures, and depending on the culture that you come from, the culture that you're speaking to, the environment that you're in, that can change. But assuming that we are talking about the general business inside the United States or in Western Europe, you should start with what you want them to remember, because that's probably all they will remember. I very much believe in starting with a thesis. I get very frustrated with people who tell meandering stories, and I'm like, what is the point? Start there. I want to listen to the meandering story, but it's illustrative, right? If you start describing the garden path from the gate to all the different flowers, if you don't tell me we're heading for the front door, I don't know why I'm listening to you. If you say, oh my gosh, I went to this beautiful cottage, and as I was going down the path, I saw these things, then I get it, right? You've set up what you're talking about. And I'm much more likely to listen to you talk about, the climbing clematis than if you just say, gosh, here's a pretty flower. It smells like jasmine. Those things it's not as much. It becomes distraction. So I'd say the focus is really important. And most of us don't know what our focus actually is. Most of us think that we are talking about something that we're not actually talking about. Can't tell you how many persuasive speeches I've listened to that are informative, or informative speeches that are persuasive, especially informative speeches that are persuasive, that they really want to persuade you about something.
And informative and persuasive speeches in this context, we're talking about specific categories in competitive speech.
But also listening to someone come to a meeting and say they're actually going to tell you about a new cabinet that has been set up. But that's not really what they're telling you about. What they really want to tell you about is how, with this cabinet and the storage that we're using this cabinet, the way that we're storing it is actually marginalizing people. An example is that we have locked storage cabinet that has supplies for classrooms, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But we put it in a place that only the workers who are there during the day, who are staff workers, open the door and then lock the door at night. So if anybody teaches a night class or a very early class, they don't have access to those expo markers or whatever it is that they need to function in their workplace. That's marginalizing people. But most people will just start talking about the cabinet. They don't start with the people are being blocked from access to doing really good teaching. And this cabinet is an example of it, right?
Okay.
And this is such a solvable problem. Like, we shouldn't get wound about this. We just got to give people keys to that room, right? Like, these are solvable, simple problems, but they become a really big issue if we can't identify what the thing is.
Interesting. And I think when you start talking about things in that, there's a lot to unwrap in that discussion there. First of all, a lot of it is we talk about, I talk a lot about the why bring that up. What are you talking about? What's your goal? What's your point? And that's exactly what you're talking about there.
Yes.
Tell me where you want to go, and then I'll go with you.
Right.
But you also start talking about some of these other things when you start getting into the ideas of marginalization, and we talk about identity politics, and we talk about things like privilege and all of these other things. We don't really get, and it's one of those challenges with a lot of the argument that's out there, is that people don't actually unpeel that and figure out exactly what folks are talking about. But that's what we're talking about, and I've come to see a lot more of that too in an accessibility perspective. Because when you started telling that story, I thought you were going to talk, it was going to go in a direction not of a locked door, but in a doorknob or a locking mechanism that requires two hands to operate.
Oh, yeah.
And once you start looking at these things from a different perspective, and I was forced to start looking at them from that perspective, you just don't think about it. And somebody can go ahead and say, this is a problem, here's why, let's talk about it.
Right. One of my things, which I'm so grateful, I know this is going to sound like a small thing, but the podiums at my school are adjustable. They go up and down, and it has changed my life because I am short. And if they have the podiums that sit at one location, it's surprisingly difficult for me to put my notes down and read them and be able to, otherwise I have to step out from the podium. So what I've done over the course of my career is I just pretty much memorize what I'm going to say and get out from behind the podium anyway. But
which is generally a preferable idea.
That's the right answer. But, because I'm easily mobile, because of a bunch of other things. Mm-hmm. But man, it's nice to have that podium where I can pop up, say PowerPoints if I'm running them or whatever, and then have access to all of my materials just right there in front of me at short person A.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, it's the same way then for a tall person as well.
Absolutely.
Especially somebody who's, say, past the age of 40, where you start to find your reading vision starts to fade and notes become a little harder to read.
Right.
And doing all that. And that all then ties again into those same ideas. And that's another, a little bit of a tangent here, but that's one of those things that's so important. Why, I always tell folks, if you're going to be giving a presentation the next day, go check out the room the day before.
Absolutely.
Find out what you're working with. Find out is that podium not going to work for you? Great. You want to know that the day before. Right. And if it will work for you, you want to know that as well. So you
want to be prepared anyway, because I promise you it will break. Right? That's just how it works.
Of course.
The podium will break. It will be extremely hot in the room. It will be extremely cold in the room. Something weird will happen. I've had microphones fail in large rooms. That's always fun. Shouting randomly. People in the front feel terrified. People in the back feel ostracized. It's it's not good.
Exactly. Exactly. So if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to or about your team, where should they go?
They can find me at the University of Washington, Bothell. My name is Denise Vaughan, V as in Victor, AUGHAN. My email there is deniseva@uw.edu.
Awesome. So we'll have all of that information available, and you can just head on over to 2minutetalktips.com/Denise to check out all of those links. So Denise, thank you so much for being with us this week. This has been fantastic.
Good to see
you. It's always great to catch up after all these years and see how similar experiences set folks on very different paths. Plus, we ended up talking about several books. That tends to happen when you connect with folks in the academic space. You can find links to those titles and more at 2minutetalktips.com/Denise. So what did this episode remind you of? Let us know in the comments at that same place, 2minutetalktips.com/Denise. You can connect with Denise via email or LinkedIn, or you can learn more about the UW Bothell Forensics team by visiting its site. Check out 2minutetalktips.com/Denise for all those links. Do you know a high school or college student thinking about speech and debate? Encourage them to check out their school's team and join in. The benefits can really last a lifetime. Share this episode with someone else today by giving them that link I've already mentioned several times here, 2minutetalktips.com/Denise. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
2-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.